So the first week we talked about how the Mass was like a hero's journey, that at Mass we find challenges, adventure, even love. Last week we talked about why we were coming to Mass. Maybe we came to Mass because this is what we always do, or we were looking for something but not quite sure what it was. How we wanted to be in the real presence of God, so we've decided to go to Mass on Sunday. But as Sunday gets closer, you begin to have some doubts. Now, who am I to be in the presence of God? Maybe because of what I've done or what I've failed to do, God doesn't really want me to be in His presence. You ever had these doubts? If you have, you're in good company. Remember how in Luke's Gospel, after recognizing Jesus as the Messiah, Peter said to him, "Depart from me, for I'm a sinful man." Or the parable of the prodigal son. How he realized that after he made such a mess of his life, he realized that he had no choice but to go back home to his father and beg for mercy. He practiced his speech all the way home. I imagine that each footstep became heavier and heavier as he trudged home. But when the father saw his son, he ran up to his son, wrapped his arms around him, and before the son could even give his speech, he was able to take away all his doubts and about belonging or wanted. So have you ever felt that you've had doubts about being wanted, not just by God, but by friends or family? I know that I have. About 15 years ago, my Aunt Pauline wanted to gather all the Corder family. She invited all the aunts, uncles, and cousins from all over the country to come to Lexington, Nebraska. She even invited me. Now, this was big. I'd only recently connected with the family. It had been years and even decades since I've seen most of them. And that's including my little sister and my little brother. I wasn't sure if they really wanted me to come. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to come. Luckily, my wife had a better sense of family, so of course we would come. Now, the closest airport to Lexington is about 4 or 5 hours away, because it's Nebraska. So we took the train, and I was facing doubts along the way, and I was still wondering if we were going to be able to, if I was still wanted. The train was delayed because of weather, because it's Nebraska, which meant that we didn't get to the depot till around 2 a.m. in the morning. Now, the depot was empty, but it was unlocked, because it's Nebraska. We went inside to wait for the sun to come up before calling the family for a ride. We had just got inside when 3 cars pulled up into the parking lot. My cousins poured out of the cars along with my sister Christy. I hadn't seen her in over 20 years. She didn't say a word. She ran up and gave me a hug that must have lasted 3 whole minutes. Without a word, this gesture showed me that I was home. Sometimes gestures say more than words. Now, wouldn't it be nice if there was some sort of gesture that when we walked through these doors, that we knew that we were home? Well, there is. When we walked through the doors at the Mass, we were met by the baptismal font at the front entrance of the holy water and the stoops at the sides. Here we pause, we put our hands on the water, and make the sign of the cross. What we're doing is this. We're reminding ourselves that we were baptized in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, that we are beloved. That at baptism we were given the gifts, the chrisms of being priest, prophet, and king, that we belong, that we are home. This is our hug. When you make this gesture, make it a big hug. As a matter of fact, when you make all the gestures at Mass, do it with intention. As you look around, you see that you have family and friends ready to join you. They're all preparing for Mass in their own way. Some are reciting the Rosary in the community. Some are praying it silently, either from their seat or from the kneeler. Some are quietly reconnecting with family and friends. There's really no wrong way to prepare for Mass, but there is a correct way, and that is respectfully. If you're connecting with friends and family, do it quietly in respect for those who are praying. If you're praying, instead of being distracted by those who are connecting, include a prayer of thanks that we are a church of living stones. Keeping in mind that at every Mass, there are people coming for the first time. And at every Mass, there are people that are coming back to Mass. Many of them are looking to you for signs that they're welcome and that they are home. So we're all waiting for Mass to begin. Now this brings up a question. When does Mass begin? Now there are 2 answers to those questions. There's the theological answer and the liturgical answer, kind of like the head answer and the heart answer from last week. You can't really separate the 2. On the theological level, Mass begins when you decide to go to Mass. Whether you decided when you were leaving the parking lot last week, or Tuesday this week, or when you woke up this morning, Mass begins when you decided to come to Mass, because that's when you made the decision you were responding to the call of the Holy Spirit. It may have felt like your idea or sounded like your spouse, but it was the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit called you and you said yes. Think about that. Everyone in this church right now has been called and has said yes to the Holy Spirit. We are truly on holy ground. Now, on a liturgical level, Mass begins when the entrance procession begins. What that looks like here at St. Anthony's is that when the time gets closer, you'll see some of the ministers gather at the baptismal font. There'll be an altar server carrying the cross. That's to remind us that we follow Christ. Then there will be a second altar server carrying a candle, remind us that Christ is the light of the world. The third altar server carrying a second candle, reminding us that we are the light of the world through baptism. Now, to make that point even clearer, the altar servers are wearing white to remind us of our baptismal gowns. Following the altar servers, there will be a lector or lectors. And the lector is the Latin word for reader. When there isn't a deacon, a lector will hold the Gospels. Gospel means good news. He'll hold it high so we can see that we will be hearing the good news of Jesus. After the lectors, we will have the presiding priest and sometimes a deacon who enters last as ministers of the sacraments. Mass hasn't begun yet. Remember, it begins when the entrance procession begins. The entrance processions can't begin without us. Mass begins when we stand and join the procession. I've seen videos of Masses celebrated in small villages in Africa in which these villages, the people will leave their homes singing and dancing as they come to the church where the ministers are waiting. The people enter the church with their songs and offerings, sometimes fruit, sometimes even live chickens. They make their way to their seats in pure joy of being in the presence of God. Remember that the Constitution of Sacred Liturgy says that we are in the real presence of God in the people. When we stand together, pray together, work together. When we stand, we are processing with and becoming the real presence of God. Now this week, I'm going to ask you to make 3 people feel genuinely welcome. Could be somebody that you know well, somebody you've never seen or haven't met, or someone you've never even thought of looking at before. The key is to make it a genuine welcome. We're going to be in the real presence of God.